Spread love, man.
Freedom is really a disappearing act. It's like you have to learn how to disappear your ego. And the absolute lack of concern about yourself and how things affect you and how self-absorbed you are and how important you are and their need to be right all the time and all of that. This is all stuff that is part of a paradigm that we have been taught because we believe in this, ego, which stands for edging God out. Our ego is the part of us that is our false self.
Ever feel like the word freedom gets thrown around so much, like it just loses all meaning?
Yeah, totally.
Like, what does it even mean anymore?
Right.
So today, we are diving deep, into what freedom really means. And we're getting into it according to the spiritual teacher, Wayne Dyer.
Okay.
And trust me, this is not just about, like, doing whatever you want.
Yeah.
We're going to be dissecting a fascinating talk that he gave, where he basically drops this bomb that true freedom is about the absolute lack of concern.
Which, let's be honest, sounds a little counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Isn't freedom about having choices about pursuing your dreams? So how can it be about a lack of concern?
Right. It's like, does that mean we just become indifferent to everything?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? Dyer actually tells this great story about walking with Marianne Williamson, and she asks him about his secret desires.
Okay.
And his answer, he wished to disappear and still be here.
Wow. This story, and we'll get into what he meant by that, I think perfectly encapsulates Dyer's point. True freedom is about transcending the ego, not feeding it.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because according to Dyer, the ego is all about edging God out, essentially creating a false separation between us and something much larger.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, your ego is not your amigo.
Yeah.
The ego thrives on this illusion of separation, making us believe we're alone, vulnerable, and in constant competition with the world.
Yeah.
But Dyer argues this separation is the root of our suffering, this endless cycle of wanting, grasping, and never truly feeling fulfilled.
Okay, so how does absolute lack of concern play into all of this? It's not about becoming indifferent, right? It's more about, what do you think? A deep inner peace? A trust in something bigger than ourselves?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's about accessing a deep, abiding sense of peace and trust that comes from recognizing our interconnectedness with something much greater than ourselves.
Because if we buy into the ego's illusion of separation, we're constantly striving, worrying, always trying to control everything. But what if, as Dyer suggests, we're actually part of something bigger, something that's always supporting us?
It completely changes the game. Instead of that constant fear and anxiety, imagine facing life's challenges with this unshakable knowing that you're not alone, that you're held by something larger than yourself.
Yeah.
That's the kind of radical freedom Dyer's talking about.
So how do we even begin to access that? How do we break free from this ego-driven illusion of separation and tap into that deeper awareness?
Well, Dyer uses this brilliant analogy of two babies in the womb.
Okay.
One baby is convinced there's a world beyond the womb, while the other thinks that's crazy.
Because to that baby, the womb is all there is, right? It can't even fathom the possibility of something more.
Exactly. And that's how our ego operates.
Wow.
It limits our perception, making us believe that this physical world is all there is.
So the baby who believes in something more, that's like the part of us that senses there's got to be more to life than meets the eye, the part that's drawn to these ideas of personal growth and spiritual exploration.
Yes. And Dyer has a name for people who feel this pull. He calls them fringe dwellers.
Fringe dwellers.
They might not live in yurts or anything, but they sense there's more to life than the default setting.
And they're not afraid to explore those deeper questions. Like, hey, if you're listening to this deep dive, you might be one of those fringe dwellers yourself.
And there's nothing fringe about seeking deeper meaning and connection in a world that often feels chaotic and disconnected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It takes courage to question the status quo, to look beyond the surface of things. So for all you fringe dwellers out there, Dyer wants you to know you're not alone. In fact, he suggests that more and more people are starting to question the nature of reality itself. They're starting to wake up to that deeper truth that's always been present, even if we're not always aware of it.
It's like we're all on a journey of remembering who we truly are. Not just physical beings, but spiritual beings having a human experience.
Which totally changes how we view freedom, right? Because if we're clinging to this limited idea of ourselves, our freedom will always be limited to the material world.
Exactly. We chase external validation, possessions, achievements, anything to fill that void. But Dyer argues that true fulfillment, true freedom can only be found by connecting with that deeper spiritual part of ourselves.
Which begs the question, if this spiritual essence is already within us, how do we access it? It can feel like this huge abstract concept.
It's understandable to feel that way, but Dyer doesn't present it as some mystical process. It's about shifting our perspective, about choosing thoughts and beliefs that are aligned with our spiritual nature, rather than our ego's limitations.
Okay, so instead of letting our thoughts spiral into, like, I'm not good enough or I'll never have enough, it's about consciously choosing thoughts that are more aligned with this idea of interconnectedness and abundance.
You've got it. It's like we're gently redirecting our attention from the ego's fear-based narrative to a more expansive, heart-centered way of being.
That makes me think of those times when I'm completely engrossed in something I love, like painting or hiking or having a deep conversation with someone. It's like the ego takes a back seat and I just tap into this incredible sense of peace and flow.
Those are perfect examples, those moments of deep connection where you lose yourself in the flow of something greater. Those are glimpses of that deeper reality Dyer's talking about.
It's like we all have those moments, those little sparks of something more, but often like we get so caught up in the day-to-day grind that we forget to fan those flames.
Precisely. And that's where conscious effort comes in. It's about noticing when our thoughts are pulling us back into that ego-driven cycle of fear and lack, and gently choosing a different perspective. It's about choosing thoughts and actions that align with our inherent wholeness, with our interconnectedness to something much greater.
You know, this reminds me of something you said earlier about the ego creating this constant sense of lack. Does that mean that part of tapping into this spiritual freedom is about shifting from a mindset of lack to a mindset of abundance?
Absolutely. The ego sees the world through a lens of scarcity. It's always comparing, competing, and feeling like it's not enough. But when we connect with our spiritual essence, we tap into this wellspring of abundance that's always available to us. Not necessarily in a material sense, although that can be a byproduct, but in a sense of deep inner fulfillment and knowing that we are always supported, always loved, always connected.
So instead of constantly chasing after more, it's about recognizing the abundance that's already present within us and all around us.
Yes. And recognizing that abundance isn't just about material possessions. It's about love, joy, gratitude, creativity, all those qualities that flow from a heart that's aligned with our spiritual nature.
It sounds like Dyer is suggesting that true freedom, that absolute lack of concern, comes from a deep embodied knowing that we are inherently worthy, whole, and complete just as we are.
That's exactly right. It's not about achieving some external measure of success or worthiness. It's about recognizing and embracing the truth of who we are at our core.
Yeah.
Spiritual beings having a human experience.
So how do we actually live that truth? How do we move through the world from that place of inherent wholeness and freedom, even when life throws us curveballs? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
How do we actually embody this kind of freedom in our everyday lives? You know, especially when it feels like the world is just like determined to throw us off balance.
It's a practice.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy. But Dyer would say it starts with awareness. Just pay attention to your thoughts throughout the day. When you notice your mind like spiraling into worry, fear, or, that self-criticism, just gently guide your attention back to the present moment.
Like hitting the pause button on that negative self-talk before it can spiral out of control.
Exactly. Take a few deep breaths. Remind yourself that you are not your thoughts. You're the awareness behind the thoughts. And as you become more aware of those ego-driven thought patterns, you can start to consciously choose a different perspective.
So it's about recognizing we have a choice. Instead of getting swept away by the ego's drama, we can choose to align with that deeper sense of peace and wholeness that's always available to us.
That's the key. And every time you make that choice, you're strengthening your connection to your spiritual essence, to that place of true freedom within. Remember Dyer's point. True freedom is about that absolute lack of concern. And that doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to the world. It's about showing up with a deep sense of inner peace and trust, even amidst life's challenges.
It's about recognizing that even though we can't control external circumstances, we can control our reactions to them. We can choose to respond from a place of fear or a place of love.
Precisely. And the more we consciously choose love, compassion, and connection, the more we embody that spiritual freedom that Dyer's talking about. It's like we're gradually shifting our entire perception of reality from one of scarcity and separation to one of abundance and interconnectedness.
So for our listener who's feeling inspired to cultivate this kind of freedom in their own life, What's one tangible step they can take starting today?
I'd suggest this. Find a practice that helps you connect with that deeper sense of peace and presence within.
Uh,
Whether it's meditations, spending time in nature, creating art, or even just taking a few deep breaths throughout the day, find what works for you and make it a regular practice.
It's like building a muscle, right?
Yeah.
The more we practice connecting with that inner stillness and peace, the stronger and more accessible it becomes. And the more we can access that place of inner peace, the more freedom we experience in every area of our lives.
That's beautifully said. It's about recognizing that true freedom isn't something we find outside ourselves. It's something we cultivate from within.
This has been such a rich conversation. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me into the world of Wayne Dyer and this profound perspective on freedom.
My pleasure. It's always a joy to explore these empowering ideas.
And for our listeners, keep an eye out for our next deep dive where we'll be exploring another fascinating topic. Until then, keep those minds curious and those hearts open.